And when you're inflamed, because you're eating this omega-6 rich, because omega-6s are generally inflammatory, which is also contributes to cancer. So omega-3 rich foods are anti-inflammatory and omega-6s are inflammatory. So we've gone to a total wrong balance of those, which are, so basically we used to have about the same equivalent 1:1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. We are now, apparently a colleague of mine did a study where she discovered that South Africans went anything from 1:15 to 1:30. So they got 30 some South Africans have 30 parts of omega-6s, inflammatory products, chemicals, as opposed to one of the anti-inflammatories. So that's one of the reasons why meat has got a really bad name, because grass-fed, healthy animals that haven't gone through the stress of being farmed actually have the right proportion of omega-3s and omega-6s. So that inflammation makes the body acidic as well. So then when the body is acidic, it'll also desperately wants to be alkaline, so it'll start pulling in minerals like calcium and magnesium from the bones and everywhere else to try and get it. But that acidic environment is also something where cancer will thrive. So lots of vegetables, a little bit of fruit, not too much fruit, because fruit is obviously, after all, full of sugar, even though it's natural sugar. But we've got to be very careful of that, and certainly fruit juice is not something that I would promote, or even dried fruit to unless it's very small amounts. So fruit, if we were to eat fruit as it was 500 years ago, we'd probably be okay, because apples were that size and kind of sour. Now they're that size and very sweet. So it's a totally different fruit that we're eating, where it's not, people think, oh, it's natural and healthy. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I don't know if I've answered your question, but hopefully I've touched on some of it.
To some extent, yes. One of the other things I wanted to touch on was the preponderance of more and more cancers. Then are you saying that's
that's definitely, that's certainly diet related, because of the farmed meat that we're eating, the inflammatory meat that we're eating. So that goes back to what I said before. Certainly the high amount of lots of sugar that we're eating, which includes fruit actually in there, and then also just the fact that we're just not eating enough vegetables. So basically the body will go haywire if we don't give it you need, for example, to run a car, you need oil and water and petrol. We don't expect the car to run without those things, but for some reason or other expect our bodies to run without proper food, what real food is. And so what those body cells will do, they'll just go out of control because they don't really know, we're not giving them the right nutrients. So the cells that are produced are not healthy cells, not cells that can be part of the whole biochemical process that are giving us the requirements that we need to make a healthy cell.
Do stevia and honey fit into the same category as sweet
Well,
things?
it's like why are we always looking for something that's sweet? So we, unfortunately, a little bit of honey, a little bit of stevia is okay, but I find that when people, if they just replace sugar with stevia and honey, they still have the sweet tooth. So unless you take it out of your diet completely, in fact, there's apparently if you take it out for 3 weeks or something, then you don't crave it as much. You just sort of change your habits. So they're okay, but you've got to be careful of how much you use them, and it can't just replace sugar.
Do you know what the difficulties are with genetically modified?
Well, there's some studies that show, that as far as I know, that they change the genetic material of your microbiota. That's gut flora. Those are the bacteria and fungi that live in our gastrointestinal tract. Now, we are actually 90% bacteria, or I shouldn't say microorganisms more than just bacteria. So we want to be able to encourage the healthy growth of our bacteria, which contribute to our good health. And there's lots of studies to show that that's. Sorry, I forgot your question there. What was it?
OGM.
OGM. Yeah. So there's also studies to show that when the GM food kind of disrupt that, they feed into the parasitic bacteria. We all have parasitic bacteria, but we are supposed to have enough of the healthy ones that the parasitic ones don't really matter. But what the GM crops do is they actually encourage the growth, because they interfere with gene material, because they've got strange gene thing. They interfere with the gene material of the microbiota. They've also been known to contribute to a situation which is called permeable gut syndrome. It's also colloquially called leaky gut. And there's more and more evidence that is a major role player in almost all chronic diseases. Basically, what happens is there becomes gaps between the cells of the gastrointestinal tract, especially in the intestine, and what happens is relatively undigested food is then able to enter into the bloodstream, and that's what causes lots of food intolerances and intestinal problems. Yeah, and then that can basically, it's like part of the autoimmune disease spectrum. So all those things like Hashimoto's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, and there's evidence to show that even neurodegenerative disease have an autoimmune aspect, and so as to sort of even dementia, Alzheimer's, and those kind of things, and heart disease.
If you were to become Queen Beatrice of the whole world, and you could select, and without thinking of the repercussions as regards how people are going to eat, in other words, how quickly it's done.
Yeah.
But you said we have to do without certain foodstuffs.
Yes. Sugar would be number one.
Would it?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. And then obviously all the white flours and white grains, refined grains, because they behave in pretty much the same way as the sugar. They would be as depleting of nutrients. And there's, in fact, there's evidence to show that even whole wheat bread actually spikes the blood sugar levels more than sugar. And unfortunately, spiking blood sugar levels is not a good thing, because when your sugar levels go high, the sugar combines with proteins and fats in the body and becomes very destructive. Some people might know of something called HbA1c. If you've got diabetes, you might know that it's the hemoglobin of the red cell, which attaches to sugar, and it kind of gives you a little sort of mirror image of what's going on in the rest of the body. So that if your blood sugar, if the HbA1c gets high, you know that you've doing damage, because it's not only doing damage to the red cell, it's doing damage to every cell in the body. And they say that Alzheimer's, for example, is diabetes type 3. Because of the way that sugar can actually destroy your brain cells, and apparently sugar is as dangerous to the brain cells as cocaine. And if it was developed today, it would probably be a Schedule 6 or 7 drug.
Wow, that is amazing. Amazing. Yeah. Thank goodness you're saying that for people to know.
Yep.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Okay. So,
but how can I ask the question? How can we live a non-sugar diet? It's impossible.
No, it's not.
Well, but you're talking about there's fruit.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying that you have to exclude fruit altogether. I'm not saying that you have to exclude fruit altogether, but you need to think about what fruit is most like the fruit that we ate 1,000 years ago. So, things that are like wild berries and berries in general, generally speaking, are closer to the original fruit that there was. And then don't choose an apple for the size and its sweetness. Choose an apple that's smaller and less sweet. And so fruit in general. But fruit juice is just sugar water, really. I mean, it's very damaging because fructose on the whole is only really processed in the liver, and it actually can do as much damage if you're eating, drinking a glass of fruit juice and a couple of glasses of fruit juice a day, and you're eating lots of fruit. People seem to think, that 5 fruited vegetables a day, so they do 5 fruit and no vegetables. No, that doesn't work actually. So maybe 2 fruit, maybe 3 fruit, but it's got to be what are called low glycemic index or low glycemic load fruit. So those are as I say, all the berries, watermelon, apple, pears, plums are kind of in that spectrum. Pawpaws, those are grapefruit and citrus fruit, lemons, that sort of thing are very good for that. But I just want to go back to the fructose, how fructose actually only gets processed in the liver. And unfortunately, what actually happens is if you've got too much fructose, it'll turn to fat, and the liver cells become fatty cells. And you get a condition called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And it's basically, I mean, most people with diabetes probably have it, and other people that have a condition called insulin resistance, which is a pre-diabetic state, they will probably have it. And it's rife in countries where people don't drink alcohol. Sort of Middle East kind of countries, there is so much non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's the same as alcohol fatty liver disease. It looks the same. If you look at the liver, it will look the same. So it's doing as much damage. That's what sugar's doing. I mean, that's what those fruit sugars are doing. If you're drinking fruit juice, appletizers, whatever, those things.
So this theory about the 1 glass or 2 glasses of red wine,
I mean, I think that actually probably does less damage than but you must never overindulge. 1 or 2 glasses of red wine, they say it works really well because it's that dark red colour is really good. Okay, there is going to be some, you've got to be careful, don't overdo it. And if you're going to drink wine, you need to drink organic wine and sulfur-free wine. And there's lots of organic wines in South Africa, and I don't know why people don't. They're not on every single menu of every restaurant. It's hard to find them. There are more than 25 organic wineries in the Western Cape, and it doesn't have to be expensive. There's anything from 35 Rand, and they're perfectly drinkable. And there's very good quality ones. They're very expensive, but there's good quality wines. So stick with red wine, 1 or 2 glasses. Don't binge, but yeah. And I don't know if you know anything about the seven zones. The blue zones. The blue zones are places all over the world where people live sort of older than anywhere else. There's one on an island in Greece. There's one in Japan. They're kind of all over the place. And basically, one of the things that they talk about is that these people drink a glass of wine. They also have a community spirit. They pray or they meditate. Those things are really important. And they forage. They eat a lot of locally grown sort of spinaches and greens that they just pick from around and about them. Although they do farm, they do just eat a lot of stuff that just grows wild around them. And there's a lot of stuff here that we can forage and eat in your garden. As you going for a walk on the mountain, as you go walking down the road, you see at the moment there's all those beautiful little serum, the little yellow flowers. Those are high in vitamin C. They're fantastic, and they're everywhere at the moment. So, you've got to look around you, try and think about what we knew years ago, talk to the elderly, talk to people who are interested in it. educate yourself. That's what we need to do. Just do whatever you can. It is a mindset, and it is a way of it that you have to actually kind of get over the fact that you actually go and buy your vegetables from Pick n Pay, from the supermarket, or any supermarket. That we got to change that mindset, and it does take time, and but we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our children, and we owe it to the planet.
Can you just tell us a little bit about fasting? It's long-term thing, starvation.
Okay. I'm not a great fan of fasting, although the occasional fasting one day at a time is not a bad thing. But you've got to be very careful, because fasting and you've got to be really healthy to be able to fast. And a lot of people even think they're healthy when they aren't, because what happens when you fast is that you actually start to detoxify. You're more than if you aren't fasting. So because the fasting kind of, the longer you are without food, you're using up more of the body's energies to do that detoxification process. But detoxification doesn't just take energy; it also takes all the nutrients. So you've got to make sure that you've supplied your body with those. I'm a bit of a believer in what's called the intermittent fasting. Basically, you should always make sure that there's 12 hours before your dinner and your breakfast, and up to 16 hours. I think with people who have diabetic or have blood sugar levels, you've got to be very careful. But for an average, relatively healthy person, it actually has been shown to do all sorts of good things to the body. So I think, and you've got to drink lots of water when you make sure. And I'm also a great fan of herbal teas. And when I say herbal teas, I do not mean the tea bags, although obviously those are what's convenient for people. But go out there's so many herbs and spices out there that actually are helpful for detoxing and fasting. So like ginger, fenugreek, milk thistle, star anise. It's just that all turmeric, lemon, mint, lemongrass, all those things. And I grow quite a lot of those in my garden, but I also go through my spice shelf, put in some whatever herbs and spices. And that's another way of getting like a whole lot of nutrients that are easily absorbable, so you kind of feeding yourself without actually having to eat a whole meal that's got 20 different vegetables in it. Because ideally that's what we want, 20 different vegetables, not 5 different vegetables. It's rubbish.
And starvation, what kind of impact does that have, and why?
Yeah, well, it starts, but I think one of the reasons why starvation will actually the body actually starts to use up muscle to actually do the biochemical process that it requires to stay alive. So it needs nutrients to do all the things that it has. So basically, while you're starving, your body the metabolic rate starts to slow down, but it doesn't stop. So you need it still needs all the nutrients that are required to sort of break down and make cells and make just to keep you alive, to give you energy, etc. So what starts happening is the body starts to leach the proteins out of your muscles, and it's not necessarily just your your limb, the muscles of your limbs, or the muscles that you can see. There'll also be the heart muscle, the lung muscles, the kidneys muscles, the gastrointestinal tract muscles. All those will actually start to break down, and then you get that muscle wasting, which is indicative of basically of starvation. So you will actually, and then if your muscles are wasting, then your heart can't actually pump, your digestive tract can't move food down it, and and you start to just really slow down, and the body will then starve to death, and all the tissues and organs will actually stop functioning ultimately.
A slight change in subject. There are certain foods that have been associated with having something really good about them, like turmeric that you mentioned, red peppers, and cinnamon.
Yeah, sort of superfoods.
Even if you could just give us a brief sentence about why we would eat any one of those, or anything else that you think of that really, ideally you would like to put those somehow in somebody's diet. So in the scheme that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So, we call those things superfoods because they are very high and very nutrient dense. So it's, I would say anything that's brightly colored is going to be giving you more nutrients. Turmeric is sort of the golden thing at the moment. It's anti-inflammatory. It's got that beautiful bright yellow color. So if you can put that into, you can put it into curries, you can put it into your green smoothie drink, you can put it into your tea, it can go into a lot of different things. So it's just foods that are very, very, very high in nutrients, and the more you put those in, kind of the healthier you're going to be. You're giving your body you're kind of giving your body choices. Just like you would like to have choices when you start going to meal, you want to give your body the choices to be able to use this or that or whatever it wants to make what it wants to keep you healthy. The more limited your diet is, then the less options it has, the less choices it has. So all those superfoods, they all have other benefits. The turmeric is anti-inflammatory. It brings down your blood sugar levels. It helps with detoxification. It supplies certain nutrients that are required for certain biochemical processes that are really healthy. So, cinnamon lowers blood sugar levels. It's also good for the liver and things. So those, so the more of those kind of foods the sort of intensely flavored, brightly colored foods that you can put into your diet, the better it is.
Obesity, the
Yeah.
single biggest problem in America especially, but also becomingly so in our population in South Africa.
Yeah.
Obesity, when you look at a person, what do you know about them as a result?
I know they're malnourished.
Yeah, that's funny, I know.
I know they're malnourished because basically fat cells don't require as much nutrients to be able to be made as a healthy, metabolically active cell. So they've obviously been eating foods that are nutrient deficient. And the other aspect is also stress. There's no doubt about that. Basically, when you are stressed, your cortisol, there's a stress hormone called cortisol, which rises, and along with that, so when you're stressed, when a healthy stress response, for example, if you were to run from a tiger or a lion or something, you have that cortisol level goes up, and then it tells the liver to break down glycogen, which is the stored sugar, and then your blood sugar level goes up, and then that sugar should go into your cells and muscle cells, and then you should just keep on running. But unfortunately, most of us, when we have chronic stress situations, we're not running from the tiger. We're actually sitting there waiting for that stress to just keep on coming to us. So our cortisol level goes up, our blood sugar levels goes up, our insulin level goes up. So insulin is used to take sugar out of the blood and into the cell. So, but because the blood sugar levels constantly, so your cortisol levels are sort of constantly high, your blood sugar levels are constantly high because it's chronic stress, and your insulin levels are chronically high. What happens is that the insulin actually takes that sugar and turns it into fat, and that's what that sort of specifically that sort of fat that's around the belly comes from that. And so it's quite often people say, oh, but I eat so healthily, but I still get fat. And that's quite often because of that stress. It's a stress response. So yes, it's possibly that it's a combination of things. And then there's also all the chemicals and things that we actually put into our system, which the body doesn't really know what to do with them, so it hides them in fat cells sometimes. A small amount it can actually sort of possibly handle if it's got the right, if it's close enough to a natural product that it kind of understands it or knows what it is or can recognize it. So if you look at a label of a highly processed food and there's all those ingredients on it, most of those you don't even know what they are. No idea what they are. If you don't know what they are, then your body chemicals certainly do not know what they are. Then what are they going to do with it? So you put them into your system, and it says, now, what the hell do I do with that? What am I doing with that? So it kind of puts them into fat cells to keep them, so that it keeps those fat cells kind of more kind of alive. They're there because they're hanging. They have a role to play. They've got to hide all those those chemicals that they're putting in. And also, there's also quite a lot of evidence that our microbiota, as I said before, the gut flora, that people that are overweight have a different makeup of microbiota to a healthy person. And so there's quite a lot of new therapy called fecal transplant. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Basically where they take the bacteria from a healthy person and will put it into a non-healthy person. And then I read this thing about a person who's had a fecal transplant from her overweight daughter, and she'd never had a weight problem. And as soon as after that, she had a weight problem because she had the wrong mix of bacteria, and the sort of the one that actually sort of promotes fats or fat digestion. So you're more likely to put on weight.
Maybe the reverse would also apply.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Maybe the reverse would apply. Maybe we'll all go around having fecal transplants to lose weight.
There was something I was going to ask you before. But tell us about water in the meantime.
Okay, water. Yeah, well, there's so much water. As with everything, it's a minefield. So most of the water that we get out of the tap is full of chlorine, so that's going to make us acidic. It's high in chlorine is a toxin, and some water systems have fluoride in it. So you just really can't be putting that. We're putting some toxins into our system, and what does the body do with it? It doesn't really know what to do with it. So it's like we are kind of just adding another toxic load to our system. Water is it's not easy. You want to try and get it as available to people, which is one of the reasons why I really liked herbal teas, because you boil the water. So instead of filtering water, filtering water is good, but it also takes out the good with the good with the bad. So you're left with a sort of dead water. If you drink a herbal tea, you're going to boil off the chlorine, and then you're going to add in all the phytonutrients and nutrients from herbal teas, and it's I think actually preferable to drink herbal teas to water. So. Yeah, and then there's all sorts of other toxins that can get into the water system, like hormones from all the millions of people who are on HRT and the pill. So there's like the estrogen levels are sky high in some water tables, and other mining water that's near mining mines and things. There's going to be toxins getting into the water and things. So. Yeah, it's difficult. We have to do the best we can with what we have, but if we don't try our best, then we're not going to get anywhere.
Potentially the last question.
Yes.
As you mentioned, we are 90% bacteria.
Yeah.
And microorganisms.
Yes.
There's this big rage in this era, marketing mostly, which says that you've got to have antibacterial, antiseptics.
Oh.
And it is really worrying to me,
yes.
the amount that we actually are putting ourselves in contact with things which are actually killing the bacteria that we need on our hands as well. And
absolutely.
And absolutely. Can you mention in what way one can protect oneself from it? Would you use an antiseptic hand wash?
Never.
Yes.
I would never use one.
Seriously?
I would never use an antiseptic hand wash. Hot soapy water is actually absolutely fine. There's people, we bath too much, we shower too much. Just top and tail, and you're good to go. Keep the healthy bacteria on your skin for we didn't used to bath and shower every day, twice a day, 3 times a day, and then cover ourselves with antiseptic creams and petrochemical creams. You know, it's just not what we should be doing. We should be using natural things. I do use some essential oils for if I've got, you know, for various things, you know, like maybe if I was for scent, for example, I'll use some rose geraniums essential oil or something like that. So, and I use tea tree oil sometimes, you know, you can use oregano oil. They've all got antibacterial properties, but they're not like those antibiotics and antiseptics that are just sort of randomly kill every single bacteria, good or bad. So we absolutely have to have those bacteria, and people actually seem to think that every time they get sick they just need to take an antibiotic, and it's just destroying our gut microbiota. So we're just getting sicker and sicker from it, because it's an essential part of our lives, and we just not.
Does that explain that somebody said to me the other day, we need to reintroduce the amount of fermented foods in our diet?
Absolutely. I'm a great fan of fermented foods. But I mean, most people are familiar with probably yogurt and sauerkraut. Those are probably the things that most people are familiar with. They are basically foods. It's a process used to keep food, you know, to keep them make food last longer, and was used more years ago when we didn't have refrigeration, etc. They're full of natural, healthy bacteria. And basically what you do is you just either, for the sauerkraut and kimchi, which is quite sort of fashionable, which is the Korean form of sauerkraut, and it's kind of spicy, and I find much more delicious than sauerkraut. You just basically mix salt, and then I put lots of sort of garlic and ginger and cumin and coriander and things with mine as well. So it's really kind of tasty, and then I leave it to ferment for up to 3 months. And then I'll put it in the refrigerator. But so yogurt, unfortunately, the yogurt that we call yogurt today is hardly yogurt. You know, I mean, you can hardly call it fermented foods. If you're making your own yogurt out of organic, non-pasteurized, non-antibiotic infused, non-hormone infused, non-pesticide, herbicide infused milk, and then you're making your own yogurt, and the longer you leave it out to ferment, for example, I mean, time is money for the manufacturers, so they're probably fermenting that yogurt for a few hours, and then they add thickeners and this and that to kind of make it feel like it's yogurt, and then 90% of it, 90% they put sugar in it. So I mean, that's just a total waste of time. As far as I'm concerned, you should be making your own yogurt, or buying from a source that you know where it's coming from. And I usually promote something like a 24 to 35 to 36 hour yogurt, maybe even 2 days, because the longer you leave it out of the fridge to ferment, the more bacterial colonies you're going to be encouraging, and the more going to grow. So you're going to be replacing much more of those. Then there's things like kefir, which is a little it looks a bit like a cauliflower little floret that you put into milk, which apparently has more bacteria than yogurt, and then more bacterial colonies. And then cheese. Yeah, it is, but I don't know if today's processing methods, you'd have to just make sure that you're using processing methods that are going to be doing the right thing. I read something recently about Emmenthal cheese and how it used to have those big holes in it, and that was something to do with, I think that's something to do with the amount of bacteria that's growing, and now those holes are getting smaller and smaller because of the processing method. But also I use a lot of other ones. I mean, I do something called beetroot kvass, which is a fermented beetroot juice, which I encourage people to drink before a meal. Beetroot is very good for the production of bile, so it helps to break down fat in your diet. And fat, when I talk about fat, I mean the good fats and the fatty vitamins like vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin K, and the essential omega oils. So if without the ability to break that down, and that happens, I find that quite often happens, and people, especially if they've had their gallbladder removed, have great difficulty absorbing fats. And people think that that's okay, but it's not okay at all, because obviously you need those things.
Hello and welcome to the Environmental News Network. We are filming from the lovely Constantia Valley with helicopters flying overhead, birds tweeting all around us, and I am basically going to cover some information that is deemed extremely important in terms of the environment, and it is actually extremely important. I mean, it's actually crazy important, but you sitting there in your house may or may not be aware of this. But it is actually so important that we've gone out of our way just to reiterate certain points of this. So the story actually starts a long, long time ago, but the part that I'm going to start with is the Great Barrier Reef, which was the first kind of point that it started becoming to everyone's attention. As some of you may or may not have heard, the Great Barrier Reef has been in slow decline over a period of time. And what is known as coral bleaching, which is basically this beautiful, lovely, luscious coral, it basically bleaches into this dull grey or dull white kind of shade due to lack of nutrients and ocean acidification. So a report was released roughly about 3 weeks ago, in which it's the most comprehensive study ever done on the reef, which they're saying that roughly 83% of the Great Barrier Reef is now dead. The question is whether or not, well, it's the top surface, remember that. The question is whether or not the Great Barrier Reef will be able to recover from such an event. And it is deemed extremely unlikely that the Great Barrier Reef is going to be able to recover. So as a result of this, people have taken some dramatic steps. They've basically gone and they're looking at doing things that neutralize the pH content of the top surface of the water in an attempt to basically remove the acidification problem that is causing the bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef. The problem really is, though, is that what's happening on the Great Barrier Reef is not a micro problem. So it's not a local problem. The problem that's happening on the Great Barrier Reef is actually a macro problem. And what that means is that there is no action that can be taken by any person in Australia, New Zealand, any of the surrounding islands. There is absolutely nothing that they can do about it, because what you are really witnessing is the impact of the macro event of climate change that is having a direct impact not only on the Great Barrier Reef, but on reefs all around the world. And what that means is that if you start looking at the kind of articles we've put out much news articles about this, that's been published rather widely, and there is kind of social activists that are trying to start campaigns, save the Great Barrier Reef, save the Great Barrier Reef, all over Facebook, Twitter, and various other groups. But the reality is that there is absolutely nothing that can be done to save the Great Barrier Reef, because it's a macro problem caused by overall climate change. So the thinking behind the Great Barrier Reef, if you understand that it is like the heart of the ocean. I mean, there nowhere else in the world is such a diverse, large kind of place in the ocean found with such a density of life. So in a way, it's like the heart of the ocean. When you and I don't know how old you are, but when most of us, a lot of us were born, the Great Barrier Reef was an abundant, beautiful place. And inside of our time, we're actually going to see the death of the heart of the ocean. And, no social activism is going to stop it. The only thing that is going to stop it is if we eventually kind of move away from this idea of climate change. But bearing in mind that 83% of the reef is already dead, the probability of us being able to stop it is almost zero. So then, sorry, I've just been corrected, it was 93% of the reef is dead. That's actually right. So then it brings us to another component. So now take that story and throw that story on one side of your mind, okay? And then it comes to another part of the story. Now they were looking, a study was recently done on what is causing ocean acidification. But while they were studying that, they were looking at oxygen levels inside of the ocean. Now, there is a relationship between the volume of plankton that is present in the water and their ability to sequester carbon dioxide. The ocean, despite what you may have heard, is actually the largest sequesterer of carbon dioxide. And when I say sequester, I mean that it takes in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. So the ocean is actually the largest, what we call a carbon sink. So it's bigger than the rainforest, bigger than any other arboreal forest, it's bigger than anything that we have done. The ocean actually does most of the work. So most of the oxygen that you're breathing comes from the ocean. And I'm going to come to that point in a little bit. I'm just going to explain a bit about the dynamics of what's happening in the ocean. So basically, plankton are responsible for bringing oxygen from the surface of the water, bringing carbon dioxide from the surface of the water, and they harness that as they keep the carbon, they release the oxygen. But because the top surface of the water has been heated, because of the amount of sunlight that is impacting on the ocean, the plankton are no longer able to reach the top surface of the water, and thus, even though they are still filtering some carbon dioxide that is resident, because that's what acidification is, it's an increase in carbon dioxide, it's mainly carbon that they're picking up, and there's less oxygen going around the ocean. So the report came out that basically said by 2030, you would start to see off all shores, or you would start to see obvious signs of lack of oxygen inside of the water. And there's another report that came out, but it's kind of minor by comparison, but it's still significantly important, is that the plankton is responsible for bringing that oxygen right from the top surface levels right to all the levels going down the marine chain as far as it can. And what this does is it enables a healthy marine environment where creatures of all different kind of levels in the ocean are capable of eating or breathing. So with the loss of oxygen in the water, with the reduction in oxygen in the water, and with the growing kind of losses of oxygen in the water, the impact on marine life is projected to be devastating. Devastating. So what you're talking about is the loss of massive marine chains. So where you and I now can walk into the store and pick up like fish, a large proportion of those fish are they're dying. They're dying. So because they're just dying of suffocation, there is nothing for them to actually breathe. So the impacts, the knock-on effect impacts that this has is dramatic. So now if you take that and put that in the side as well, along with our little story about the Great Barrier Reef, what you're left with is an interesting little study that's been done, and something that we've actually here at Brave Green World, we've been monitoring for quite some time. In fact, it was a question that was raised a while back. When you were in school, you got taught, so you said, like, how much oxygen is actually in the atmosphere, okay? So the common phrase that we throw around is 21%. 21% of oxygen is available in the atmosphere, which means that for every breath that you take, you're taking in some helium, some argon, some oxygen, but of that, 21% is actually oxygen. Now, if you understand the fundamentals of climate change, what they're saying is that there's an increase in carbon dioxide. So from combustion, like we're burning carbon, from kind of exhaust, carbon monoxide. So from all of these things, there is a combustion process that's taking. It's what's called oxidization, which means that in order to release carbon in the form of smoke or byproduct, it has to attach itself to an oxygen so that it becomes lighter and it floats up. So that's how you get carbon dioxide, which means that there's a direct mathematical relationship between the volume of carbon dioxide versus the volume of oxygen. So some studies were done about this, because what we wanted to find out was, what is the actual oxygen? You can't have an increase in carbon dioxide without having a corresponding decrease in oxygen. So we wanted to see what studies were done in relation to the amount of atmospheric oxygen that's available. And so far, the results are kind of sketchy. Scientists actually blatantly stated in the document that they just don't know. So they've done some recordings. Some cities, they've picked up oxygen contents as low as 14%, some as low as 17%. And these are just patches. If you imagine patches floating around above cities that are deoxygenated. And now you can see it all starts to make sense. Inside of your ocean, you're now getting patches of loss of oxygen. Inside of your atmosphere, you're getting loss of oxygen. And those same losses of oxygen are starting to have an impact on the marine ecosystem, which is in turn having an impact on what you're seeing in the Great Barrier Reef. And so, or for the first time actually, all the little pieces of a puzzle are starting to coalesce into one big story. And that story is happening right now. Right now, as I say this, it's happening. And what are you and I really capable of doing about it? Nothing. What are you and I capable of bringing about some kind of change that will affect it? We are powerful. But this has got to be bigger than some social media campaign. This has got to be a fundamental change in the way that we're going about doing business. What it means is that there's greater level of sunlight that is hitting the ocean. The ocean is absorbing more heat because all it is really energy transfer. So there is more energy inside of our atmospheric system than there is outside of our atmospheric system. And what that does is it starts to heat up the top surface of the water. And because the top surface of water begins to heat up, what it really does is anything. It's the same thing that happens with any water. If you heat up water, it expands. As there's more energy absorbed by the ocean, there's lower oxygen inside of the ocean. There's greater ocean acidification, which is reducing plankton. And ultimately, it is now starting to have an impact not only on marine-based kind of oxygen levels, but also on atmospheric-based oxygen levels. And this is a story that is actually more serious than anything you're going to hear. You know, it's more serious than anything that you're going to read. It's more serious than anything that you're actually going to uncover this week. And you know, you can put it in your head, you can do what you like with it. But the fact is that if you take a look, and I'm just going to reiterate why ENN is actually important. If you look at what the news was covering inside of this week, we covered things on CNN like Trump. We covered a whole lot of rubbish that's related to events on the field. But why is nobody talking about this? Because this, in your lifetime, no longer is it 2100, the fame, this is when we'll see the effects of climate change. We're talking something that is only 14 years away before you are going to see significant changes in the oxygen content of the surface of the ocean, and thus it's going to impact those that eat seafood. It's going to impact the entire marine chain, and it's going to impact oxygen levels. And when scientists were asked, what happens if the oxygen levels get to a low point? What is the net effect? What is the safety level for human beings? You know what they said? They don't know. They don't know. Now think about that. Just put that in the back of your head. Remember, for all of you that are going to be watching Donald Trump go on and attack Hillary Clinton, and you're going to watch Bernie Sanders try climb all over Clinton, and how important that is, the reality is that day by day, the oxygen content of this atmosphere that you're relying on to watch those things is actually running out. So I want to thank you for your time in watching ENN. Remember that this is the channel that is going to bring you actual news, real news, that's actually important to you and actually has meaning to not only you but everybody else on Earth. ENN is the one channel where you're going to actually find out the things that are important. So thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.
When I start these presentations and I'm talking to police colleagues at Interpol, I usually leave the F word out until the last thing, because they don't understand the F word. So I start by describing the type of organised crime network, and it will be a network with beneficial owners in Europe, potentially Spain. They're insurers of that business in the UK, for example, the banks in Central Europe, the incorporated companies in Central America or offshore tax jurisdictions. The business is supported by labour from Indonesia. They conduct their outputs from their business activities, exported into Southeast Asian countries. The offices of the company come from countries such as Spain, Chile, Portugal, Peru, and Ukraine. And their markets are in Thailand, Vietnam, China, and the US. And then you ask them, what do you think I'm talking about? And when you say fish, they go, what? Okay. It's a job to convince police. Now, Interpol's, what Interpol depends on is the National Central Bureau point of contact. The National Central Bureau point of contact needs to establish relationships with all the national law enforcement agencies who are dealing with this area. And quite frequently, many of those agencies have never sat down together and talked. So we call that an environmental security seminar with a fisheries